Linda Hale was in the middle of a luncheon when the papers arrived. Crystal glasses clinked. Soft music played. She was laughing with donors, dressed impeccably, confidence woven into every gesture. Then a man in a dark suit approached her table. "Linda Hale?" he asked. She looked up, irritated. "Yes." "You've been served." The room fell silent. The mask slips. Linda didn't read the documents immediately. She smiled politely, excused herself, and walked to the restroom. Only when the door locked behind her did her hands begin to shake. Fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty. The plaintiff's name made her stomach drop. Ethan Hale. "That's impossible," she whispered. She had buried him, outweighted him, erased him, or so she thought. The first hearing. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected. No drama, no shouting, just facts. Linda's lawyer argued aggressively. "These claims are baseless," he said. "The plaintiff waited over a decade. Documents were legally filed." Ethan's attorney stood calmly. "And those documents," she said, "will be proven falsified." She submitted the metadata. The judge leaned forward. Linda avoided Ethan's eyes. Cracks under oath. Witnesses followed. The original lawyer testified. "I never drafted this amendment," he said, "and I never witnessed Ethan Hale's signature." A handwriting expert followed. "The signature was traced," she said, "likely from an older document." Linda's face tightened. She whispered furiously to her attorney. The job finds out. 3 days later, Linda was called into a board meeting at the nonprofit. They had received an anonymous tip with attachments, financial irregularities, misappropriated funds, patterns eerily similar to Ethan's case. Linda denied everything, but audits don't care about denial. She was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The donors began asking questions. The collapse accelerates. Back in court, the judge ordered a full forensic audit of Linda's finances. Bank records were subpoenaed. Transfers surfaced. Offshore accounts, personal expenses paid with trust money, charity funds diverted. Linda's lawyer requested delays. The judge denied them. The confrontation. During a recess, Linda finally looked at Ethan. Her voice was low. She hissed, "You're ruining your own life, too. You'll never recover from this." Ethan met her gaze calmly. "You already took my childhood," he said. "This is just the paperwork catching up." She looked away. Public exposure. Local news picked up the story. Nonprofit executive accused of major financial fraud. Photos of Linda circulated online. The comments were brutal. Former colleagues distanced themselves. Friends stopped answering calls. The house, his house, sat quietly in the background of every photo. The verdict approaches. Months passed. Evidence piled higher. Linda's confidence eroded. Her posture changed. Her clothes grew simpler. Her smile vanished. And on the final day of trial, the judge prepared to speak. Ethan's hands trembled, not with fear, but with release. Ethan didn't confront Linda again. Not because he forgave her, not because he forgot, but because he understood something vital. People like Linda didn't lose by force. They lost by exposure. Starting from nothing. At 19, Ethan moved out of his aunt's apartment and into a cramped studio above a closed-down bakery. The rent was cheap. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The heat barely worked. But it was his. During the day, he worked construction. At night, he took online classes, business law, accounting, contracts. Not because he dreamed of becoming rich, but because he needed to understand how he had been robbed. Every forged line, every manipulated clause, every loophole Linda had exploited. He studied until his eyes burned. Watching from afar. Linda, meanwhile, thrived. Through social media and mutual acquaintances, Ethan watched her life unfold. She hosted dinner parties in his house. She laughed on beaches he would never afford. She spoke publicly about resilience and family values. And she had a new job, a very important one. Linda was now financial director at a regional nonprofit, trusted with donor funds, budgets, and compliance. Ethan noticed the irony immediately. The woman who stole from a child now controlled other people's money. He saved the information. The first crack. The breakthrough came 5 years later. Ethan was 24, exhausted after a 12-hour shift scrolling through archived court filings online. He wasn't expecting anything. Then he saw it. A document timestamp that didn't make sense. A trust amendment filed 3 days after his father's death, signed by Ethan, dated before the death. Ethan's heart started racing. He pulled the original trust document. The fonts didn't match, the formatting was off, and in the metadata, buried deep inside the file, was the creator's name, Linda Hale. Not a law firm, not a clerk, Linda. The silent investigation. Ethan didn't celebrate, he didn't confront her, he didn't tell anyone. He copied everything. Screenshots, downloads, backups. Then he hired someone, a retired forensic accountant named Martin Lowell, a man who didn't ask questions unless he was paid to answer them. Martin reviewed the files carefully. "This is fraud," he said plainly, "and not the sloppy kind." Ethan swallowed. "Can it be proven?" Martin nodded slowly. "Yes, but it won't be quick, and it won't be cheap." Ethan looked at his bank balance. It barely covered rent. "Then I'll wait," he said. The long game. For the next 2 years, Ethan lived like a ghost. He saved every dollar, he worked extra shifts, he skipped meals. He watched Linda grow more careless. She bragged about her success. She posted photos of renovations. She spoke at charity events about ethics. And quietly, she repeated her pattern. Small discrepancies, unexplained transfers, budget irregularities. Nothing obvious. Nothing accidental. Becoming dangerous. By the time Ethan turned 27, he was no longer the boy Linda had discarded. He understood contracts. He understood financial crime. He understood courtrooms. And, more importantly, he understood Linda. She didn't believe in consequences. She believed in silence. And Ethan was about to take that away from her. The filing. One cold morning in March, Ethan walked into a courthouse carrying a thin folder. Inside it was enough evidence to destroy a life. The clerk stamped the documents. Case accepted. Linda would be served within 48 hours. Ethan stepped outside and breathed in deeply. For the first time in over a decade, the house no longer felt lost. It felt temporary. Ethan thought staying with his aunt would be temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month. That's what Linda had said, her voice warm and apologetic as she helped him load his bags into the car. "You know this is still your home," she told him. "I just need time to sort things out." Ethan believed her, because believing her hurt less than the alternative. Life on the sidelines. His aunt, Margaret, lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. She meant well, but she had her own struggles. Long hours at work, bills that never seemed to shrink, and a life already stretched thin. Ethan slept on a fold-out couch. His clothes stayed in a suitcase. Every Sunday he asked the same question: "When can I go home?" And every time the answer was vague. "Soon. Your stepmom is handling things. She says it's complicated." At first, Linda called regularly. She asked about school. She reminded him to focus on his grades. She said she was protecting his future. Then the calls slowed. Texts replaced conversations, short, formal, distant. And then, silence. The first red flag. 3 months later, a letter arrived. Not from Linda, from a law firm. Ethan opened it with shaking hands. The words didn't make sense at first. Occupancy agreement, temporary residence, revised guardianship. He took it to his aunt. Margaret read it slowly, her face tightening with every line. "This says Linda has full control over the property and over the trust." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That's not possible," he said. "Dad wouldn't—" Margaret sighed. "Ethan, did you sign anything?" The memory hit him like ice water. The kitchen table, the folder, Linda's smile. "Yes," he whispered. Margaret closed her eyes. Locked out. Ethan went back to the house the next day. He stood on the porch where he used to sit with his father on summer evenings. He tried his key. It didn't fit. He knocked. No answer. A neighbor peeked through their window, then came outside. "Oh, you don't live here anymore, do you?" Ethan's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "Well, Linda told everyone you moved away, said you didn't want the house, said you got difficult." Ethan stepped back, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. "That's not true." Mrs. Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "Well, she sold some of your father's things, said she needed the money." Ethan's ears rang. His father's tools, his mother's jewelry, the furniture he grew up with. Gone. The paper trail of lies. Over the next year, Ethan learned the truth piece by piece. Linda had done more than manage paperwork. She had forged signatures. She had altered trust documents. She had filed motions claiming Ethan was unstable and financially irresponsible, all without him knowing. By the time he turned 18, it was done. The house was legally hers. The trust was restructured. The money, once meant to secure Ethan's future, was gone, drained slowly, methodically, and perfectly legally on paper. A childhood cut short. College was never discussed again. Ethan took a job stocking shelves at night while finishing high school during the day. He watched his friends plan futures he could no longer afford. Meanwhile, Linda's life flourished. She drove a new car, she took vacations, she renovated the house Ethan once called home, and worst of all, she stopped pretending to care. The final conversation. 2 weeks before Ethan graduated high school, he called her. For the first time in months, she answered. "I just want to understand, why are you doing this to me?" There was a pause. Then Linda laughed. Not kindly, not gently. "You should be grateful. I could have done worse." Ethan felt something break inside him. "That was my father's house. And now it's mine. Life isn't fair, Ethan. You'll learn that." She hung up. The vow. That night, Ethan sat alone on the fire escape outside his aunt's apartment. The city hummed below. The sky was empty. He realized something then, something painful but clarifying. No one was coming to save him. If he wanted justice, if he wanted his... The house stood at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street, its white paint slightly faded, its porch boards creaking in familiar places. For most people, it was just another suburban home. But for Ethan Hale, it was everything. It was where his father taught him how to ride a bike, running behind him with one hand on the seat, laughing breathlessly. It was where his mother had planted roses before she died, red ones that bloomed every spring without fail. It was where the walls still carried echoes of birthdays, arguments, apologies, and love. And it was the house his father promised would always be his. Ethan was only 16 when his father, Richard Hale, collapsed at work from a sudden heart attack. One moment, Richard was a healthy, hard-working man in his early 40s. The next, Ethan was standing in a hospital hallway that smelled of disinfectant and grief, listening to a doctor say the words that split his life in two. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." The funeral came and went in a blur of black suits, hushed condolences, and casseroles left on the porch. Ethan barely remembered any of it. All he could remember was standing beside the coffin, staring at his father's still face, waiting stupidly for him to open his eyes and say this was all a mistake. But he never did. The promise. A week after the funeral, Ethan was called into his father's lawyer's office. The room was quiet, formal, and intimidating. Leather chairs, dark wood desk, framed certificates on the wall. The lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, adjusted his glasses and spoke gently. "Your father planned carefully for your future, Ethan." He explained that Richard had left everything to his son: the family house, a substantial inheritance from investments and insurance, a trust fund that would mature when Ethan turned 25. Until then, the money would be managed by a trustee to protect Ethan from exploitation. Richard had been very clear. "This is for my son," the lawyer said. "No one else." Ethan nodded numbly. He didn't feel lucky, he felt hollow. At that moment, the door opened, and Linda walked in. The stepmother. Linda Hale had married Richard only 2 years before his death. She was elegant, always perfectly dressed, her smile soft and reassuring. She had never been cruel to Ethan, just distant, polite, careful. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder as she sat beside him. "We'll get through this together," she said softly. Ethan wanted to believe her. She was all he had left. The first changes. At first, things seemed okay. Linda cooked dinners, she asked about school, she offered to help with college planning, she spoke often about keeping the family together. But slowly, almost invisibly, things began to shift. She took over the mail, she started organizing Richard's documents, she insisted on handling bills and paperwork so Ethan could focus on being a kid. Then one evening, she sat him down at the kitchen table. Her voice was calm, concerned. "Ethan, sweetheart, this house is very expensive to maintain. Your father never realized how much it costs. Property taxes, repairs, it's overwhelming." Ethan frowned sadly. "Dad said everything was taken care of." Linda sighed sadly. "He thought it was, but the truth is he made some mistakes." She slid a folder across the table. "Just some paperwork, temporary. It gives me authority to manage things until you're older." Ethan hesitated. He didn't understand legal language. He didn't know what he was signing. He just knew he was tired, grieving, and scared of losing the only adult left in his life. Linda smiled reassuringly. "I would never hurt you," she said. So Ethan signed. The betrayal began. Within months, the house no longer felt like his. Linda changed the locks for security. She redecorated, removing his mother's photos. She insisted certain rooms were off limits. Then came the words that shattered him. "I think it's best if you stay with your aunt for a while, just until things stabilize." Ethan stared at her. "This is my house." Linda's expression hardened just slightly. "Legally," she said, "it isn't. Not yet." A week later, his bags were packed. At 16 years old, the courtroom was silent. Not the tense kind of silence filled with whispers and movement, but the heavy kind. The kind that presses down on your chest and reminds you that lives are about to change forever. Linda Hale sat rigid in her chair. For the first time since Ethan had known her, she looked small. No jewelry, no confident smile, no carefully rehearsed expressions. Just a woman cornered by her own history. The verdict. The judge adjusted his glasses and spoke clearly, deliberately. The evidence presented establishes a consistent pattern of fraud, forgery, and intentional deception. Linda's attorney stiffened. The judge continued. The amendments filed after Richard Hale's death were falsified. The signature of Ethan Hale was forged. The court finds that Linda Hale knowingly misrepresented legal documents to unlawfully seize property and assets. Ethan felt his breath catch. The court therefore orders the following. The room seemed to fade as the words landed one by one. Full reversal of property ownership, restoration of the original trust, repayment of all misappropriated funds with interest, civil damages awarded to Ethan Hale. And finally, this court refers the defendant to the district attorney for criminal prosecution related to financial crimes uncovered during this trial. Linda closed her eyes. It was over. The house comes home. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in front of the house again. The same porch, the same trees, the same front door, but everything felt different. This time the key fit. The door opened with a familiar creak, and the smell of old wood and dust filled the air. The house was emptier than he remembered. Linda had taken what she could, but the walls were still there. The memories were still there. Ethan walked slowly through each room. The living room where his father used to sit every evening, the kitchen table where everything had gone wrong, the hallway where his mother's laughter once echoed. He sat down on the floor and cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, for the boy who had been erased, for the years that were stolen, for the promise that had finally been kept. The other case. Linda's downfall didn't stop with the civil verdict. The nonprofit audit was completed. The findings were devastating. Over 7 years, Linda had siphoned funds into shell accounts. Donations meant for children and families had paid for vacations, renovations, and luxuries. She was fired publicly. Her professional licenses were revoked. Criminal charges followed. The same woman who once told Ethan life isn't fair now stood before another judge, this time with no control, no leverage, no lies left to tell. She was sentenced to prison. What she lost. Linda lost the house. She lost the money. She lost her career. But most of all, she lost the illusion that time protects the guilty, because time doesn't forget. It waits. What he gained. Ethan didn't become bitter. He didn't seek revenge beyond the truth. He renovated the house slowly, carefully, keeping the roses his mother planted. He finished his education without debt. He placed part of the recovered inheritance into a trust of his own, not for fear, but for respect. The final lesson. Years later, Ethan received a letter, handwritten, from prison. It was short. No apology, no accountability, just bitterness. Ethan read it once. Then he placed it back in the envelope and set it aside. Some endings don't need replies. Closing words. The house still stands at the end of that quiet street. People pass it every day without knowing what it survived, but Ethan knows. And sometimes, late at night, he sits on the porch where his father once stood and thinks about how close everything came to disappearing forever. Greed almost won. Almost. But lies don't age well. And the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home.